Cincinnati, the Queen City, the quintessential Midwestern river town, home of the nation's first professional baseball team, the Reds, home of chili served on spaghetti for some reason, but honestly, it's pretty good. Home of the second best ice cream in the nation. It's one of the many mid-sized Midwestern cities that are all just over 2 million people in the metro. Like many cities, Cincinnati has strayed far from its urbanist roots over the past century. And like many cities, it's slowly working its way back. For this video, we'll dive into Cincinnati's urban heritage, its sprawl-y present, and its slow progress toward urbanism. And for the first time, I'll lay out my vision for what transit should look like in a city. Welcome to Heartland Urbanist. Let's dig in. I'm Matt Caffrey, a dad and an organizer based in Columbus, Ohio. Subscribe if you're interested in more videos about the past, present, and potential urbanist utopia future of cities in the Midwest. And let me know your topic suggestions in the comments. Chapter 1, Cincy's Urbanist Heritage. Cincinnati is one of the oldest cities in the nation that is not on the East Coast. Founded in 1788, and by 1860, it was the sixth largest city in the nation. It's built on the Ohio River and it's surrounded by steep hills. The city initially was dense, filling a small area between the river and the hills. The first transit was horse-drawn streetcars, eventually replaced by cable cars and then electric streetcars, eventually 222 miles in total, carrying 100 million passengers a year. One of the other distinctive features of Cincinnati's transit history are the inclines, which opened up the hills surrounding the city to being settled, especially by middle-income and lower-income people. Streetcars actually traveled up and down the inclines and then continued on, which I think is pretty unique. Let's better understand Cincinnati's geography, and especially its topography. Cincinnati is hilly, y'all. In addition to the river, you've got 7 hills across the city, and that really penned in development, as we were just discussing. Beyond the hills, there is a plateau with a lot more space for the city to grow. Across the Ohio River from Cincinnati is northern Kentucky, with the cities of Covington and Newport, which are dense and walkable today, and developed alongside Cincinnati. There are several bridges across Cincinnati, including the famous Roebling Bridge, which was built by the same engineer as the Brooklyn Bridge, but decades earlier. Chapter 2. The decline and sprawl of Cincinnati. But as Cincinnati grew, the streetcars were no longer enough. In the early 20th century, the city decided to build a bold subway and elevated rail plan that would have ringed the city as it then existed. The plan was supported in a 1916 vote and was nearly finished, but World War I caused shortages and cost increases. Several stations and miles of tunnel were finished, but the system never opened. It's been sitting unused since 1927. Then, in the early 1950s, the city disastrously decided to build highways right through neighborhoods and right through downtown, especially targeting Black neighborhoods. The whole West End was decimated. In its place was built a massive highway interchange. Much of the old unfinished subway route was also covered with freeway. At the same time, the inclines were torn down and the streetcars were phased out. Today, the city's bus system serves only 1/4 as many people, despite the metropolitan area growing by at least double in the same period. The city lost a lot of population, nearly 40% over 70 years. Shops and other reasons for people to come downtown, like theaters, closed. For decades, the suburbs sprawled further and further out while the city hollowed out, adding little but parking garages and abandoned buildings. By the late 1990s, the city was looking for ways to improve transit and to bring more people downtown and to the then blighted Over-the-Rhine neighborhood that borders downtown. In 2002, the city transit agency proposed a bold transit plan called Metro Moves. The plan included 5 light rail lines, one of which would have used the abandoned subway tunnel, 3 commuter rail lines, and a northern Kentucky downtown and uptown streetcar. It also would have expanded bus service. It would have connected both sides of the Ohio River and across the region. The plan would have been paid for by a 1/2-cent sales tax, which would have averaged about $40 per resident per year. But sadly, voters rejected it by a 2-to-1 margin. Chapter 3. Beginning of a revival? Out of the failure of Metro Moves, one project was saved. A streetcar line envisioned to run from the banks of the Ohio River through downtown and to over the Rhine, and eventually to uptown and the University of Cincinnati. That plan was later scaled back to make the uptown connection a potential future phase 2. City Council voted to approve the 3.9-mile loop in April of 2008. But it wasn't that simple. Opponents were determined to derail the streetcar. They organized for back-to-back referendums to block the streetcar in 2009 and in 2011, but luckily both failed. In 2012, construction finally began. Construction was nearly called off a year later when an anti-streetcar mayor was elected, but enough city council members came together to continue construction, which wrapped up and the streetcar opened in September of 2016. The system had a few growing pains, but after overcoming those and a decision to make the streetcar free, it was deemed that fare collection and enforcement was just too expensive to be worth it. The streetcar is now setting records for ridership. While not meeting all of the initial hopes, it is proving that Cincinnatians are willing to change their behavior over time to adopt new means of getting around. My family loves visiting Cincinnati. We go there for the incredible museum center, which occupies most of the old Union Terminal, one of the most magnificent train stations in the nation. More on that in a bit. We also love to visit the Over the Rhine neighborhood, and especially Finley Market. That's one end of the streetcar line. So we like to park there and take the streetcar downtown to go to a restaurant on the banks, or to Fountain Square area for a show, or to a Reds game. It's great. But as great as it is, it's extremely limited. It does serve a dense neighborhood, one that's experiencing rapid gentrification leading to displacement. And really, it's mostly a circulator for visitors, either tourists or Cincinnatians from other neighborhoods. It connects many of the city's most popular destinations, though not the zoo, the museum center, the art museum, the aquarium, etc. And it completely misses Cincinnati's colleges and universities, as well as many of the most dense neighborhoods. It's also not really designed for efficient transit. While it does have raised stations and no payments, it mostly runs in mixed traffic. It doesn't seem to have signal priority, so it's not exactly slow, but that's mostly because it runs along a pretty short route. So it kind of just doesn't take that long. If you were to extend the system, you'd really want to be more thoughtful about efficient transportation. So the streetcar is an important step. It's already bringing residents, shoppers, and others back into Cincinnati. But there's so much that Cincinnati needs to do to become a more livable and less car-dependent place. Chapter 4, Crayon time. Okay, now we're going to do something we've never done before on this channel. We're going to pull out the crayons. In all seriousness, I'm going to propose what I, admittedly an organizer and a dad and not a city planner or transit expert, think Cincinnati should do to build a transit system worthy of its rich urbanist heritage. Real quick before I do, here are a couple of improvements that are actually in discussion. First, in the Amtrak Connects Us plan, Union Terminal would see 3 trains a day to Dayton, Columbus, and Cleveland. This is my dream. As well as 3 additional trains a day to Indianapolis and then on to Chicago. The DC to Chicago train that stops in Cincinnati would also return to daily service. That would all be a big deal, returning Union Terminal to a useful transportation center, in addition to being an incredible museum. Secondly, Metro, the city's transit agency, is exploring a couple of BRT lines and is currently evaluating several route options. Finally, a commuter rail plan called the Eastern Connector Project is sitting on the shelf, but without any funding, it seems likely to keep sitting there. Also, with the success of the streetcar, there are a few murmurs about expansion. So let's start the crayoning there. First, the original plan called for the streetcar to extend north to Uptown and the University of Cincinnati. That is essential, not just to be a better circulator, but to become a more useful form of transit for people who live in a dense neighborhood and are less likely to own cars. Students are often correlated to the success of rail and transit projects, so extending to the University of Cincinnati is essential. But I'd go further and head north through Clifton, possibly swinging by the zoo, and eventually going to the Northside Transit Center. Northside is a diverse, vibrant, and walkable neighborhood, so streetcar service would be a perfect fit. Next, I'd love to see a connection across the river to the dense and walkable neighborhoods of Covington and Newport, Kentucky. Again, it would make the streetcar more useful as a circulator by connecting to more of Cincinnati's biggest destinations, especially the Newport Aquarium, but also more useful for transit, for people who live and work in those places. Finally, I'd love to see a branch cross over to Union Terminal. Along the way, it could pass the TQL Stadium, where the MLS team FC Cincinnati plays. Union Terminal is another big destination within the city, but once Amtrak service is expanded, as we just discussed, this branch would be critical to connecting inner city visitors to downtown destinations, hotels, etc. So that's it for the streetcar. I think those distances are workable with the streetcar system, but outside of the current system and maybe Northern Kentucky, I'd really advocate for the system to pay much more attention to fast service with dedicated lanes and signal priority. Even with that streetcar expansion, we'd still only be serving a tiny portion of the greater Cincinnati area. So to serve more people, I envision an updated version of the 2002 transit plan with BRT, light rail, and regional rail. Let's start with BRT and light rail. The 2002 plan was already pretty good, but more than 20 years later, it needs an update. With the rise of work from home and hybrid offices, as well as more jobs moving out to the suburbs, there may be less demand for a traditional hub and spoke model. So Cincinnati should evaluate which lines should be BRT, which lines should be light rail, depending on capacity and demand. But it should look at crosstown and radial lines to interconnect the region, learning from what the Twin Cities recently adopted as their plan. And given the level of sprawl in Cincinnati, the system will need to emphasize transit-oriented development in order to succeed, finding urban infill and expanded density opportunities wherever it can. Another fascinating question is whether the city would benefit from reviving one or more of the old inclines. Next, on regional rail, the 2002 plan included a few promising lines, but I think it missed a few key destinations. One that I really want to emphasize is Miami University up in Oxford in Butler County. Again, students are such a strong predictor of the success of rail projects, and it's a fairly large campus. A lot of its students come from the greater Cincinnati area, so a connection to Cincinnati would be essential. And of course, with this new rapid transit backbone, especially the rail, the bus system, both the Northern Kentucky bus system, which is called Tank, and Cincinnati's bus system, which is called Sorta, would need a total overhaul. It would need to be reoriented as a feeder system, connecting riders to trains and providing other crosstown routes that aren't as well served by rail or BRT. And again, that's increasingly important in an age where lots of people are working from home or offices have moved out into other parts of the metropolitan area. Overall, building on the existing streetcar and the Metro Moves plan, I'm proposing 4 streetcar expansions that connect some of Cincinnati's densest areas and service higher order last mile transit for the light rail. I'm also proposing 4 new light rail or BRT lines that better serve the east side, west side, north side, and a critical crosstown route. Last, I recommend an additional commuter line linking Miami University and Hamilton to Cincinnati quickly and efficiently. Check out an interactive map of my plan in the description. So there you have it, a modern, comprehensive, integrated transit plan for Cincinnati. Now, take to the comments and tear it apart. Let me know everything I got wrong, y'all. Take action. Obviously, this plan isn't going to come to fruition anytime soon or ever, but if you're based in Cincinnati, you can meaningfully contribute to getting better transit for the city by supporting Metro's BRT plan. I'll share a link in the description to learn more. And share this video with a friend who might be interested in advocating for better transit in Midwestern cities. If you enjoyed this dive into transit maximalized Cincinnati, press the like button. And if you really enjoyed it, consider contributing to the channel via LibrePay. There's a link in the description. Heartland Urbanist is also available ad-free on urbanists.video. It's a great open source community, so go check it out. Thanks for watching and see you next time.